presenter. We're going to have three presenters. Our first presenters, yours truly, Dr. Celia Lewis Davis. You will also hear from Ms. Crystal Brown and Ms. Beth Sanchez. So these will be your three presenters for today. All right. So we have three things we want to talk about today. The first one is, why is discourse important? Secondly, some tips. And last but not least, the instructional activities, cool ones that will help you encourage discourse in your classroom. So why is discourse important? Well, if we look at the journey through math education, we see that discourse has been something we've been talking about for a long time, even before the pandemic. Some of the articles that are pulled here, one of them is from 2005, and of course, discourse has been discussed even way back about how important it is in the classroom. The bottom article, the 2005 article, actually was a book on literacy, and it just talked about how discourse could be traditional, probing, or it could be discourse rich. And you'll see those kind of examples later on. In 2010, NCTM came back and said, look, I need to say this again, that discourse is that communication that we need. Students need to articulate their own ideas. They need to construct mathematical understandings. And even as recent as 2022, there's still articles coming up about discourse and how it's so important. In 2022, still talking about those talking skills. Of course, talking skills is something that's developed from elementary school, but it's even more developed, and it needs to be used to deepen those conceptual understandings. All right, so I did a research study, and my study was on the descriptive qualitative study on Algebra 1 teachers' perceptions of math literacy. Had the chance to interview 14 Algebra 1 teachers from around the country. And these are some of the conclusions and major themes that I'm pretty sure you can connect to too. But the most important one was the top one. The Algebra 1 teachers believe that students need to speak their Algebra 1 language. And that also can transfer to any course. It's important for them to speak it. It's important for them to have opportunities to express themselves mathematically in order to become a better and more math literate student. Okay, so now we're going to head to some tips to help you to have your students become just a little more literate in math and be able to discuss those with students. Did I do it? No.
I don't see it on my screen like that.
Okay.
All right, we just switched seats. I'm actually Crystal Brown, and I'm just gonna go through just a few tips and things to kind of think through. I'm trying to take my mask off as you're planning activities to encourage student discourse. All right, here we go. Lost everything, it's okay. So as you're planning the activities for sharing in the classroom and student discourse, Dr. Davis talked a lot about the discourse being the sharing of ideas among the participants and enhancing those talking skills, which I think we can kind of see how Virtual Academy or the virtual program over the past couple of years have affected students' talking skills in class. My students definitely aren't eager to talk. So here's some things we have to consider when planning these activities for them. So just think about how the students might approach the task at hand. Think about some common misconceptions, some things you may want to address before asking them to share. Think about the questioning strategies you're going to use, what questions you're going to ask, and things like that. You also want to monitor the students as they work. Look for nice models, look for common errors, look for new strategies that maybe you didn't teach or maybe you didn't think of that you think may be beneficial for students to share with their classmates. Select your students to share, and you want to do this. You don't necessarily have to do it before class, but as they're working and you're monitoring work, look for the kids. Like if you're looking for the mistakes, maybe you see a few of them, select one student to share the mistake. It can be a learning experience or opportunity for the class. Look for someone with an exemplar that you might want to share. But always give the students advance notice that they're going to share, because you want them to share, their best work and be ready to share. You don't want anyone to shut down from feeling put on the spot. Consider the sequence of sharing. Do you want the incorrect thinking to be shared first? Do you want the exemplar to be shared first? Like, what do you want to highlight? Consider the order in which you want the students to share in order to highlight what you want to be highlighted. And then finally, you just want to help the kids connect what they're thinking and the thoughts of their classmates and kind of put it all together to explain the lesson or the material that they're working on. Here are just some questions you may consider asking while in encouraging discourse. So asking the kids, tell us what you see, what are you thinking? How is your way the same as or different from someone else's? Asking students to paraphrase to make sure, they're listening to others as they engage in discourse. Will your strategy always work? What would happen if we change this? What were you thinking when you chose to do this step? So things like that. Just some different questions to consider. And the student response options. We have 3 here. Of course, you've already given the student advance notice that you're going to ask them to share something with the class. Students should always have the option to share their own ideas. Some students are very shy to share their own ideas. So you may give them the option of talking it through with a partner or a group first, and then sharing something that they heard or learned by listening to their classmates. Or if they don't have their own idea, maybe they didn't understand what someone else said or remembered it well enough to share it, they have an opportunity to ask the teacher maybe some clarifying questions so they can still engage in that discourse on the topic. All right, next up, we're going to share with you some practical exercises. So we're going to do another swap.
Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Sanchez. I'm going to share some instructional activities that I use in my math classroom. The Google Doc that I just put in the chat is templates for you. Each one that you click on will give you a forced copy, and then that is a template that you can use in your classroom immediately. So one of the first things that I do is I have students share their math stories. So I will share some of my math stories. The idea is you talk about a positive math experience. And so these are some ideas to generate. I tell students I'd like volunteers first. If I don't get volunteers, I let them know who will be chosen next class so they can have some time to think about it. But what tends to happen is I ask for 2 or 3, but one student will share a memory from elementary school of a game they loved or something that they did in a math class, and another student will be like, oh, I remember that, or I played that game too. And it just kind of generates this really positive student discourse, these conversations, these positive math memories, and it really sets the tone that math can be a really positive experience. Students didn't speak behind those black boxes for a year, and so they are uncomfortable talking with one another. So this is a nice positive way to kind of get the ball rolling. Another is partner talk. And again, previously to the pandemic, you perhaps were just able to turn to an elbow partner and say, talk about this or share this. I have found that the more structured student discourse I can have in my classroom, the richer discussions I have, the more comfortable the students are. And so eventually we can kind of move away from those structured activities. But this, you can see, this is from my class right before we did our marking period 3 progress check for an honors algebra 2 class. So the first partner had to describe step by step how to solve the rational equation. You can see partner B recorded down their steps. And then they switched, and partner B had to describe, the sign ratios on the Ferris wheel, and partner A had to write those down. And so you can see that it was just a very structured way for them to kind of have that conversation before we took that progress check. Group explanations. I'm going to actually save this for the end when I go through that Google Doc. This is one of my favorite activities, but I've never written down the directions until now. And so I'm going to go through it while I have the directions up in front of me. Math memes. These are really fun. Students, maybe at the end of a class, this is a really nice exit ticket. They can do it in groups and then share it out with the class. So here are some examples from like years ago. You can see how they felt about their geometry. This one again is like an algebra 2. The student clearly preferred synthetic division over long division. This is from statistics when we were talking about sample size. And the students really love the Drake memes talking about, what's not cool and what is cool. And so, or like what doesn't work and what does work. Those are all really nice ones that you can have in the students really do enjoy these. Partner tests. Grace Contreras, who is a Blair math teacher, first introduced me to the idea of this partner test, and I was a skeptic for sure. I did not like the idea of students working together on a test. I was worried about the noise level. I was worried about cheating. I was, those kinds of things. However, after having given a partner test, and I probably did this for the first time maybe about 4 years ago, I have never looked back. I try to give one every marking period. It is such a fantastic thing to see these students work together. You can tell that by the test A, the yellow test, and test B, the blue test, they're practically the same. Only the numbers have changed. So the students are put together with partners. They are each responsible for their own test. They're only allowed to write on their own test, but they can strategize together. They can discuss processes together. They can check each other's work. The explanations that they have with one another, like what you see, the discourse you see is so fantastic in the classroom, and they really like it. I choose the partners for them. I ask students to tell me 2 to 3 individuals that they would feel comfortable working with, and then I put the partners together. I tend to have a few students each class that don't care who they work with. So those like wild cards are kind of free to put people together. But I do strategize the partners. So some positives. They have great collaboration, really rich discussions. They are learning while they are taking the test. They are motivated to do well on the test because they don't want to let that partner down. And they also feel supported by their partner. So they're motivated to do better. They feel less stressed because they're not on their own. But you do have to consider some of the negatives. If you put 2 students together and they are disagreeing over their answers, so you want to make sure that students work well together. You don't want students to feel peer pressure. You don't want students just to ride the coattails. So again, that like strategic partner choosing is really important when choosing the partner test. Presentations. We've all done presentations, I'm sure, in class, but again, that like having that structure in place, I found to be so important this year. So this is an example of just a really structured group presentation. Each group was given their own quadratic function. I designated which each group member was responsible for doing, and then they had a group discussion question. The group discussion question was different for each group based on the quadratic function that they were given. And so then you can see step 2 was that presentation. So you can see how they wrote out their steps. They presented it to the class, but then you also want the students to be listening. So I have a capture sheet. I have found that if I have them capture all of the groups, it is too much. So if they only have to capture like 2 or 3 presentations, I find that they do a much better job of paying attention and writing those things down. And then I typically have a summarizer or one reflection question at the end of all of the presentations that everybody has to answer. And this my having structured it out from the start tends to make for a really rich discussion throughout and then really good listening during the presentations. Before we go into this, I just want to go through this doc that I shared with you all. So the math stories, that's just going to be, I think it's like 2 Google slides, 1 introductory, and then just those prompts. The partner talk, it's just a blank template for you so that you can see, so that you just have something to kind of get you started with. And they just have the stems there. The group explanations. Okay, so this is this activity that I really love that I've never written down before this. So I tried my best to be nice and clear with how it works. It does take a full class period. So this would be maybe I would spend a day after I finished teaching maybe 3 different objectives. Then I would have students have this day to kind of process and work together on these. So each group has a scorecard, and this is what the scorecards look like. So perhaps I have 3 students in a group and there's going to be 4 categories. I would not have more than 4 categories in a class period. I tend to see that most groups get through 3 or 4 categories. Each group gets the math problem in the same category. The group completes the problem. Then the group chooses 1 group member to explain. So let's say Jason, Wendy, and Derek are all part of the same group. And Derek looks at the problem and he's like, I got this. I know how to explain it. I'm ready. Jason and Wendy can prep Derek. They can practice with Derek. Derek can have the process written down. And then he's got to go to one of the listeners. The listeners are spread out around the room. If you're fortunate enough to have a teacher and a co-teacher, that's easy. Teacher on one side of the room, co-teacher on the other. If you have a student aide or a tutor in your room, you can also break it up that way. I have also done it with students. I have chosen like 2 or 3 students and kind of prepped them for what it is that they're listening for in each category. And that way you can monitor the groups and you can help them process the problems, and the students kind of sit and wait for students to come to them. So when Derek is ready, he goes to a listener, he gives the verbal explanation. He does not show his work to the listener. He has to state it. That's part of the discourse piece, right? And he has to use precise mathematic vocabulary. So his process should be clear. He should be using the appropriate vocabulary. If he does so, then on his scorecard, Derek would get a check. Then then Derek returns back to the group with another problem for math category 1. Now it's up to Jason and Wendy. So all 3 solve the problem. It's a new problem, but same category. Now it's up to Jason or Wendy for them to prepare their verbal explanation. They go to a listener and so on. If somebody gets it wrong, that's fine. Then they just take a new problem back to the group. Often I see if student, like let's say Jason came up and Jason got it wrong, then Wendy might be the one to be the next one, and Jason's going to wait another round. He also doesn't have to go back to the same listener. If he already tried to explain it to the teacher and it was wrong, he can go and try to explain it to another student in the class or whoever a different listener is. Once each person has been given a check for that category, then they move to category 2 and you just start the process over again. The biggest thing though, this is not a competition. Students are not racing through this. The goal is to practice explaining their procedures, their process, and to use that precise mathematic vocabulary. There's no prize for the end. There's no, we're not trying to race through this. You're not trying to beat anybody else. This is just a really nice collaborative instructional activity. It is not meant to be a competition. For the group presentations, I just have like a template for you. It's a slide that explains, that's the slide that I use to explain it. And then I have some templates that you could use to set up the structure for a group presentation. For the partner test, University of Michigan also does these partner quizzes, and their website does a really nice explanation of different ways to have it. So I included this here for you. They use some rationale as to why they do it. And then they also have some tips for doing a partner test. And then if you're still a skeptic about these partner tests, this is a scientific research study, the PAIRS test study. And so it does some more explanations as to why these are important and how they work and why they work. And then last, I've shared with you this meme generator. And so this is something you can share. And again, like everything forces a copy for just you, so you own it. And I've just put some really popular, memes on the side here. And then the students just follow these instructions. So at the end of the class, as a nice exit ticket, or as maybe a break in the middle of class after you've taught an objective, students can choose whichever picture and drag it over, and then click on the text to change it. And so that's just a fun way for them to share their thoughts in class and have some more discourse. And so we thank you all for coming. We're going to put the link for the EdCamp survey in the chat. Hopefully you feel like you left with some good strategies, things you can put in place today. If you have questions, feel free to email us. Thanks, everybody.